The wicker picnic basket still sat on the kitchen counter when the Holbrook family vanished in northern Michigan, a quiet region known for its stunning sand dunes and crystal-clear waters. The morning of July the 17th, 1982, began with bright sunshine and a warm summer breeze blowing through the pine forests surrounding Traverse City. At 9:30 a.m., David Holbrook, 38 years old, loaded the white Ford Country Squire with beach supplies and helped his two children into the back seat. By 2:42 p.m., Ray Perkins, the gas station attendant in Empire, waved as he watched the family drive away toward Sleeping Bear Dunes. But by 7:15 a.m. the next morning, when a hiker found their car abandoned in the beach parking lot, keys in the ignition, blood on the steering wheel, David, Susan, 12-year-old Emily, and 9-year-old Jack were gone. What happened in those less than 17 hours would remain one of Michigan's darkest unsolved mysteries for 38 years. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on cases that time couldn't bury. This is one story that Lake Michigan tried to keep hidden forever. Chapter 1. Shadows over Sleeping Bear. The coffee cup shook in Carl Dennis's hand, dark liquid sloshing against white ceramic. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March 2020 when the knock came. Not the polite knock of a neighbor or the hurried rap of a delivery driver. This was the kind of knock that makes your pulse spike and your mouth go dry. The kind that announces your past has finally arrived at your doorstep. Carl set the cup down carefully on the kitchen counter of his modest ranch home in Petoskey, Michigan. Through the lace curtains he could see them. 4 unmarked sedans parked in a semicircle across his driveway, engines still running, exhaust curling in the cold morning air. Men in dark windbreakers with yellow letters blazing across their backs. FBI, Michigan State Police, Leelanau County Sheriff's Department. He'd known this day would come. For 38 years, he'd known. His fingers weren't shaking from age, though he was 79 now, his hair gone white as winter snow, his shoulders stooped from decades of looking over them. They were shaking because he remembered. He remembered a hot July night in 1982. He remembered the sound of water lapping against aluminum. He remembered the moment everything went wrong. The knock came again, louder, more insistent. "Carl Dennis!" A voice boomed through the wooden door, sharp enough to make the neighbor's dog start barking. "Michigan State Police. We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the disappearance and deaths of David Holbrook, Susan Holbrook, Emily Holbrook, and Jack Holbrook in July 1982. Carl closed his eyes. The smell of coffee faded, replaced by phantom scents from nearly 4 decades ago. Lake water, gasoline, fear. In his mind, he saw them. The family in the Ford station wagon, windows down, kids laughing in the back seat, radio playing too loud. He saw the father's face, David Holbrook, jaw set with determination. The face of a man who'd seen something he shouldn't have seen. The face of a man who'd made the fatal mistake of thinking the law would protect him. The face of a dead man, walking. Carl Dennis opened his eyes, straightened his shoulders one last time, and walked to the door. Комментарий. Усилено открытие. Добавлены звуки, лай собаки, запахи, кофе versus фантомные запахи озера, более интенсивное напряжение. Теперь флешбэк в 1982. July 17, 1982. Traverse City, Michigan. 38 years earlier, the Holbrook family's day began like any perfect summer Saturday should, with an argument about directions. David Holbrook stood in the driveway of their 2-story colonial home on Boardman Avenue, studying a worn Michigan road map spread across the hood of their white 1979 Ford Country Squire station wagon. The wood grain paneling gleamed in the morning sun. Cicadas droned in the maple trees. "Dad, we've been to Sleeping Bear like 10 times. 12-year-old Emily said from the porch, arms crossed, wearing that expression unique to preteen girls, the one that suggested everything adults did was slightly embarrassing. She wore pink corduroy shorts, a white tank top, and had her mother's blonde hair in 2 braids. A Kodak Instamatic camera hung around her neck on a braided leather strap. "Exactly," David said, grinning, "which is why I know a shortcut through." "There is no shortcut," Susan called from inside the house, her voice carrying that particular tone wives reserve for their husbands' navigational experiments. "The highway is 20 minutes faster. Where's your sense of adventure, Sue?" "I left it somewhere on County Road 12 last summer when your shortcut added an hour to our trip." Emily rolled her eyes. "Dad's famous wrong turns, a family tradition." "Hey now," David protested, but he was smiling. At 38 years old, he was in his prime. Strong jaw, dark hair just showing threads of gray at the temples, wearing his favorite University of Michigan t-shirt. He worked as operations manager at Bayside Lumber Mill, the biggest employer in the county. Everyone knew David Holbrook. Solid, reliable, a man who showed up on time and did what he said he'd do. 9-year-old Jack came bounding out the front door, his auburn hair sticking up in 5 different directions, despite his mother's best efforts with a comb 10 minutes earlier. He wore striped tube socks pulled up to his knees, jean shorts, and a Traverse City Trojans Little League shirt with a ketchup stain on the collar. "Did you pack the Frisbee?" Jack asked, nearly tripping over his untied sneakers. "In the side pocket, champ," David said, "along with the baseball gloves. We'll throw some pop flies on the beach. Can we swim out to the buoy? We'll see. Depends on the waves." Susan Holbrook emerged from the house carrying a wicker picnic basket covered with a red checkered cloth. At 35, she was the kind of beautiful that didn't need makeup. All natural blonde hair and easy smile. As the school nurse at Traverse City Central High School, she was beloved by students and staff alike. She had a way of making even the toughest teenagers feel cared for, listened to. "I made potato salad, fried chicken, coleslaw, and chocolate chip cookies," Susan announced, "plus sandwiches for lunch." "Mom, you packed enough food for an army," Emily said. "You'll thank me when you're hungry at 3 o'clock." David closed the back hatch of the station wagon with a satisfying thunk. "All right, Holbrooks, load up. Let's hit the road before it gets too hot." "Shotgun!" Jack yelled, racing toward the front passenger seat. "Not a chance, Squirt. Back seat," Emily said, grabbing him by the collar. "Mo-om! Emily's being mean. Both of you in the back, now." Susan's nurse voice left no room for negotiation. The kids piled into the back seat, already bickering about who got more space. David caught Susan's eye and grinned. She shook her head, smiling despite herself. This was their life. Chaotic, loud, messy, and absolutely perfect. By 2:15 p.m., the white Ford was cruising west on Highway 72, windows down, pine-scented air rushing through the car. The radio played "Don't Stop Believin' by Journey. Susan sang along, gloriously off-key. David tapped the steering wheel to the beat. In the back seat, Jack was nose-deep in a Spider-Man comic book, while Emily stared out the window, watching the landscape blur past. Endless green forest giving way to glimpses of impossible blue water. They passed through the tiny town of Empire, population 475, a cluster of sun-bleached buildings barely qualifying as a town. A general store, a post office, a diner called the Lighthouse Cafe, and a Shell gas station where David pulled in to top off the tank. "Need anything from inside?" he asked Susan as he stepped out into the heat. "Maybe some Cokes for the kids, and grab a bag of ice." David walked across the hot asphalt toward the small station. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. Inside, a box fan rattled in the corner, doing little against the afternoon heat. Behind the counter sat Ray Perkins, a weathered man in his 60s with thick glasses and a transistor radio crackling with a Detroit Tigers game. "Afternoon, David," Ray said, not looking up from his racing form. "Heading up to the dunes?" "That's the plan. Beautiful day for it." "Sure is. You folks have fun out there. Watch out for the currents near the point, though. Coast Guard pulled 2 swimmers out of a riptide last week." "Will do, Ray. Thanks for the heads up." David paid for the gas, the Cokes, and a 10-pound bag of ice. Through the window he could see his family in the Ford, Jack making faces at Emily, Susan laughing at something. Normal, safe, happy. As he walked back to the car, a beat-up green pickup truck pulled into the station. Walter Green sat behind the wheel, weathered face partially shaded by a Detroit Tigers cap. He was 51, lean and sun-darkened from years working outdoors. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Walter lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel. A neutral gesture. Could have been a wave. Could have been nothing. David nodded once, barely, and kept walking. But Susan noticed the subtle change in his posture immediately, the way his shoulders went tight. "You okay?" she asked quietly as he loaded the ice into the cooler. David glanced back at the gas station. Walter was climbing out of his truck, moving slowly, like a man whose back hurt. Just another local, just another Saturday. Nothing out of the ordinary. "Yeah," David said, but his voice had lost its earlier lightness. "Let's get going." Susan lowered her voice. "Is that him? The guy from—" "Not now, Sue." David's tone was sharper than he intended. He caught himself, softened. "I'll deal with it Monday. Talk to Sheriff Clarkson. It's fine." But Susan had known David for 15 years, long enough to recognize when "it's fine" meant anything but. The Ford pulled out of the gas station at 2:42 p.m. Ray Perkins would later tell police that was the last time he saw the Holbrook family alive. He'd remember David seemed distracted. Walter Green had watched them drive away. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just watching. Комментарий. Исправлено. Добавлена семейная шутка про Dad's famous wrong turns. Добавлен намек от Дэвида, что он собирается говорить с шерифом в понедельник. Уолтер Грин теперь менее зловещий, просто усталый местный житель. Добавлены звуки: цикады, вентилятор, радио. Теперь сокращенная пляжная сцена. The Sleeping Bear. Dunes National Lakeshore stretched along Lake Michigan like a postcard come to life. Massive sand dunes towered over the water, some reaching heights of over 400 feet. On clear summer days, the lake stretched to the horizon, blue enough to rival any ocean. The Holbrooks arrived at the parking area near Glen Haven Beach at 3:10 p.m. The lot was about half full, families with umbrellas and coolers, a group of teenagers tossing a football, an older couple walking hand in hand toward the water. Seagulls cried overhead. David parked the Ford beneath a white birch tree, perfect shade. They hauled their supplies down the sandy trail toward the beach. The sound of waves grew louder with each step. The air smelled like sunscreen and lake water and summer vacation. Jack kicked off his sneakers the moment his feet hit sand and sprinted toward the waves. "Last one in is a rotten egg." "Jack, wait for your sister," Susan called, but he was already ankle-deep in the water, laughing. Emily sat on the beach blanket and fiddled with her camera. She'd gotten it for her 12th birthday in April and had been documenting everything since. Click, Jack splashing in the waves. Click, her parents setting up the umbrella together, moving in that practiced synchronicity of long married couples. Click, a sailboat in the distance, white against endless blue. "You're going to run out of film before dinner," Susan teased. I brought 3 rolls, Mom. I'm documenting our summer. Documenting, David repeated with a smile. Listen to her. 12 years old and already talking like a professional photographer. The afternoon passed in that timeless way summer afternoons do. Swimming, sandwiches, Jack's relentless campaign to bury his father in sand, Emily capturing it all on film. By 5:30 p.m., the beach had started to empty out. Families packed up their coolers and trudged back toward the parking lot, kids sunburned and exhausted and happy. "Can we rent a boat?" Jack asked, somehow still full of energy despite hours of swimming. David glanced at Susan. Something flickered across his face. "Where would we even rent one?" "Green's Marina," Jack said. "That's where Tommy Henderson's family rented canoes last weekend. He said it was awesome." David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Susan caught it immediately. "David, we don't have to—" "No, it's fine." He stood up and brushed sand off his shorts, forcing brightness into his voice. "Kids want to go out on the water. We'll go out on the water. It'll be fun." But Susan heard what he didn't say. "We'll be fine. It's a public place. What could happen?» Комментарий. Пляжная сцена сокращена примерно на 180 слов. Убрал лишние детали, оставил только самое важное. Добавлен крик чаек. Теперь сцена с Уолтером Грином на Марине. Green's Marina sat 10 minutes down a winding dirt road that hugged the shoreline. It wasn't much to look at. A weathered wooden shack with a corrugated tin roof, a rickety dock, about a dozen aluminum rowboats and canoes tied up and bobbing in the gentle waves. A hand-painted sign read, "Boat Rentals, 5 hour." Walter Green stood on the dock, coiling rope with practiced efficiency. When the Ford pulled into the dirt lot, he looked up, squinted against the sun, then went back to his work. No visible reaction. David got out slowly. Gravel crunched under his feet. "Need to rent a rowboat for an hour." Walter straightened up, hooking the rope over a cleat. Up close, he looked older than he had at the gas station. Deep lines around his eyes, calloused hands. A man who'd worked hard his whole life and had little to show for it. "Gonna cost you 15. Your sign says 5. Price went up. Gas ain't cheap, and I had to replace 3 boats last month after the storm." Walter's tone was flat, matter-of-fact. Not hostile, just tired. The 2 men stood there, 10 feet apart, something unspoken hanging in the air between them. "David, let's just go," Susan said quietly from the passenger window. "We don't need—" "It's fine." David pulled out his wallet and handed Walter a 20. "Keep the change." Walter pocketed the money and nodded toward the nearest rowboat. "That one's sound. Be back by 7. After that, it's another 15. As the family climbed carefully into the boat, Walter helped steady it, a surprisingly gentle gesture, his rough hand gripping the gunwale so Jack wouldn't slip. "Kid, grab a life jacket from that bin," he called. "Lake's calm now, but you never know." "Thanks," Jack said, pulling on an orange vest. Emily left hers in the bottom of the boat. "It's not even deep here." "Put it on," Susan said firmly. Emily, now." Emily rolled her eyes but left the vest in her lap, half-fastened. David took the oars and began rowing away from the dock. The boat glided smoothly across the water, late afternoon sun turning everything golden. From the shore, Walter Green watched them for a moment, then turned and walked into the marina shack. A moment later, another figure emerged from the shadows inside. Tall, wearing a green National Park Service Ranger uniform. Carl Dennis, 41 years old, summer seasonal ranger, worked the dunes every year since '78. The 2 men spoke in low voices. Walter pointed toward something inside the shack. Papers, maybe, or tools. Just 2 locals having a conversation. Nothing strange, nothing suspicious. Then Walter glanced toward the lake, where the Holbrook family's rowboat was now a small speck against the vast water, and said something Carl couldn't quite hear over the sound of waves against the pilings. Carl nodded slowly. Then both men walked toward the far end of the dock, where another boat, a motorized aluminum skiff, sat tied and ready. Комментарий. Уолтер теперь более неоднозначен. Он помогает детям, заботится о безопасности, объясняет цену. Неочевидный злодей. Взаимодействие Карла и Уолтера более саттл. Теперь исчезновение на следующее утро с новой странной деталью. July 18, 1982, 7:15 a.m. Margaret Fletcher liked to walk early before the heat and the tourists. At 72, she'd been coming to Sleeping Bear Dunes every July for 30 years. She knew these trails better than her own neighborhood back in Grand Rapids. At 7:15 a.m., she was walking through the Glen Haven Beach parking area, thermos of coffee in hand, when she noticed the white Ford station wagon beneath the birch tree. Strange. It had been there yesterday evening when she'd finished her walk around 6. Now, here it was again, in the exact same spot, morning dew covering the windows like frost. The driver's side door hung slightly open. Margaret walked closer. Through the window she could see a beach towel crumpled on the back seat, a child's comic book on the floor, a pair of sunglasses on the dashboard, a woman's purse on the passenger seat, contents spilling out. But no people. She knocked on the window. "Hello? Anyone here?" The only answer was the distant sound of waves and the morning chorus of birds in the pines. Margaret walked around to the open driver's door. The keys dangled from the ignition, swaying slightly in the breeze. A wallet sat in the cup holder, and there, on the steering wheel, dark and dried, was something that made her stomach drop. Blood. Not much. Just smears, like someone had gripped the wheel with an injured hand. But enough. "Hello?" she called louder, her voice cracking slightly. "Is anyone here?" Nothing but wind and waves and the sudden hammering of her own heart. Margaret hurried back to her car, hands shaking so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. She drove straight to the ranger station. By 8 a.m., Leelanau County Sheriff Tom Clarkson was standing in the parking lot, staring at the abandoned Ford. He was 47, a lifelong county resident who'd been sheriff for 12 years. He'd handled missing persons before. Usually they turned up embarrassed but fine within 24 hours. But something about this felt wrong from the start. Tom circled the vehicle slowly, careful not to disturb anything. The blood on the steering wheel, the keys in the ignition, the purse with a wallet containing cash and credit cards. Not robbery, then. A stuffed teddy bear on the back seat. A child's toy. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff Clarkson. I need a forensics team at Glen Haven Beach parking area immediately. And get me registration on a white 1979 Ford Country Squire, Michigan plates." He leaned closer to read. "Delta Echo 724. The radio crackled. "Copy that, Sheriff. Stand by." Tom scanned the tree line. No signs of a struggle in the dirt. Dozens of overlapping footprints, impossible to sort. He walked down the trail toward the beach. The sand was covered with tracks from yesterday's crowds. The radio crackled again. "Sheriff, vehicle is registered to David Holbrook, 842 Boardman Avenue, Traverse City. 38 years old, married, 2 children, ages 12 and 9. Tom's stomach went cold. 2 children. "Dispatch, contact Traverse City PD. Send a unit to that address for a welfare check, and get me search and rescue out here. Now." Within an hour, Glen Haven Beach swarmed with police. Search dogs, divers preparing to enter the water, volunteers arriving with thermoses of coffee and grim faces. The Coast Guard helicopter appeared overhead, rotors thumping, flying a search pattern along the shoreline. By noon, local radio stations were broadcasting the news. Family of 4 missing at Sleeping Bear Dunes. Car found abandoned. The phone lines at the sheriff's office lit up. Tips, theories, people claiming they'd seen the Holbrooks everywhere from Traverse City to Mackinac Island, but nobody had actually seen them. At 2:30 p.m., a volunteer searcher named Dale Morrison found something on the beach 3 miles south of Glen Haven. He called Tom over, voice shaking. A child's life jacket, bright orange, waterlogged and tangled with seaweed. The name tag sewn into the fabric read, Jack Holbrook, age 9. Tom held the small vest in his hands and felt something cold and heavy settle in his chest. He looked out at the vast expanse of Lake Michigan, stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there. "Sheriff?" Dale's voice pulled him back. "There's something else." Tom looked at the young volunteer. "What?" "The Holbrook girl. Emily. She's 12, right? Old enough for a life jacket?" "Yeah. Why?" "We found the boy's vest, but we haven't found hers. And according to the rental records from Green's Marina—" Dale held up a clipboard someone had retrieved from the shack. "Walter Green gave out 2 life jackets with that boat. Adult size and child size. Both signed out." Tom stared at the rental sheet, then back at the orange vest in his hands. 1 life jacket found, 1 still missing, and 4 people vanished into thin air. Sheriff Tom Clarkson had been doing this job for 12 years, long enough to know what those facts meant, long enough to know that families of 4 don't just disappear, long enough to know that this wasn't a missing persons case anymore. This was something far worse. Chapter 2. Ghosts in the Water, revised version. The fluorescent lights in the Leelanau County Sheriff's Office hummed like angry insects. It was 3 in the morning on July 19, 1982, and Sheriff Tom Clarkson sat at his desk surrounded by reports, photographs, and cold coffee. The ashtray overflowed with cigarette butts. He'd quit smoking 6 months ago, but tonight didn't count. Spread before him, crime scene photos of the abandoned Ford, the blood-stained steering wheel, Jack Holbrook's waterlogged life jacket, witness statements that added up to nothing. 4 people. Vanished. No bodies, no ransom demand, no explanation that made sense. Tom rubbed his eyes and looked at the timeline he'd written on the whiteboard. July 17, 1982, 2:15 p.m., Holbrook family leaves Traverse City, 2:42 p.m., last confirmed sighting at Shell Station, Empire 3:10 p.m. Arrive Glen Haven Beach, multiple witnesses, 5:45 p.m., rent rowboat from Green's Marina, 6:15 p.m., last seen rowing on lake, witness, couple from Lansing, 7:30 p.m., boat due back to Marina, never returned. July 18, 1982, 7:15 a.m., vehicle found abandoned, 2:30 p.m., Jack's life jacket found 3 miles south. Somewhere between 6:15 p.m. Saturday and 7:15 a.m. Sunday, the Holbrook family had ceased to exist. The door opened. Deputy Frank Kozlowski entered carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee and looking like he hadn't slept either. At 28, Frank was the youngest deputy on the force, but Tom had learned to trust his instincts. "State Police finished processing the vehicle," Frank said, setting down the coffee. "You're gonna want to hear this." "Hit me." "The blood on the steering wheel is type O positive, matches David Holbrook's records from his mill physical last year. Not a lot, probably from a cut or scrape. No arterial spray, nothing that suggests major trauma. So he was alive when he touched that wheel. Or whoever moved the car had his blood on their hands." Frank pulled out his notebook. "Forensics also found soil samples on the floor mats. Dark, clay-heavy. Doesn't match the sand from Glen Haven Beach." Tom leaned forward. "Meaning the car was somewhere else before it ended up in that parking lot." Exactly. They're analyzing it now, trying to narrow down the location. Frank flipped a page. Oh, and the ignition. No signs of hot wiring. Whoever drove it back used the keys. Tom stared at the timeline. Someone had taken that family somewhere, done something, then driven their car back to the beach to make it look like they'd never left. Staged. What about the rental boat? Tom asked. Still missing. Green reported it never came back. We've got Coast Guard and volunteer boats searching, but... Frank gestured toward the window, where the sky was just beginning to lighten. Lake Michigan's big, Sheriff. Real big. What about Green himself? And the ranger, Dennis? Frank's expression shifted. That's where it gets interesting. Walter Green sat in the interview room like a man who'd been expecting this conversation. He wore the same oil-stained work shirt and tiger's cap from the day before. His calloused hands rested flat on the metal table. No fidgeting, no nervousness, just tired resignation. Tom set a tape recorder on the table and pressed record. July 19th, 1982, 3:47 a.m. Interview with Walter James Green regarding the disappearance of the Holbrook family. Mr. Green, you understand you're not under arrest, but you have the right to have an attorney present. Don't need a lawyer, Walter interrupted, his voice gravelly from years of unfiltered Camels. I got nothing to hide. Tell me about yesterday. The Holbrook family rented a boat from you around 5:45 p.m. That's right. White Ford pulled up. Man, woman, 2 kids. Asked for a rowboat for an hour. Did you know David Holbrook? Walter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I knew who he was. Works at Bayside Mill. We've crossed paths. What does that mean, crossed paths? A long silence. Walter's eyes flicked to the tape recorder, then back to Tom. Few months back, I did some contract hauling for Bayside. Lumber runs, mostly. Payment dispute. Holbrook said I damaged some boards, wanted to dock my pay. I said the boards were already damaged when I picked 'em up. We had words. What kind of words? The kind men have when one thinks he's getting screwed and the other's got his mind made up. Walter leaned back in his chair. But that was March. Water under the bridge. Was it? Sheriff, I run a boat rental. I can't afford to hold grudges against half the county. Holbrook wanted a boat. I rented him a boat. That's it. Tom pulled out a photograph, the rental log from Green's Marina. You charged him $15. Your sign says $5. Price went up. Gas is expensive, and I lost 3 boats in the storm last month. Insurance don't cover shit when you're running on a shoestring. Did you see which direction they rowed? North, toward the point. Most folks go that way. Water's calmer, better view of the dunes. Walter paused. I told the kid to wear a life jacket. The boy put one on. The girl didn't want to. Tom made a note. Emily's life jacket still missing. What time did you close up? Around 8. Sat around another hour. Figured maybe they'd bring the boat back late. Happens sometimes. People lose track of time. But by 9:30 I locked up and went home. Did you go out looking for them? In the dark? On Lake Michigan? Walter shook his head. Sheriff, I'm a boat renter, not the Coast Guard. Figured they'd beached somewhere up the shore, would bring the boat back in the morning. Didn't think much of it until your deputy showed up asking questions. Tom studied the man's face. Weathered, tired, defensive, but not evasive. Where were you between 7 p.m. and midnight? Home, alone, listening to the Tigers game on the radio. They lost to the Yankees, 7-3. Want me to recap the plays? Anyone who can verify that? I live alone, Sheriff. My wife left me in 76, and I don't keep much company. Walter's expression hardened. You think I killed a family over a lumber dispute from 4 months ago? Over what? $200? I think 4 people are missing, Mr. Green, and right now you're one of the last people who saw them alive. Then I suggest you talk to Carl Dennis. Tom's pen stopped mid-note. The ranger? He was at the marina when the Holbrooks showed up. Came by around 5:30, said he was checking permits, making sure I had my licenses in order. Park Service does that sometimes. Walter leaned forward. But here's the thing, Sheriff. Carl didn't leave when the family did. He stuck around. We talked for a bit, had a smoke. Then around 6:15, 6:20, he borrowed my motorboat, said he needed to check on something up the shoreline. Tom's pulse quickened. He took your motorboat? Borrowed it. Brought it back around 9, maybe 9:15. Said everything was fine, thanked me, and left. And you didn't think to mention this sooner? Walter shrugged. You asked about the Holbrooks. Carl's a ranger. He's supposed to be out on the water. Didn't seem strange at the time. Tom stared at the rental log. Walter had told the truth about the rowboat, but there was no entry for the motorboat, no record Carl Dennis had taken it at all. Mr. Green, I'm going to need you to stay in town for the next few days. Don't leave the county. Wasn't planning on it. Walter stood slowly, his back creaking. At the door, he paused. Sheriff, I hope you find them. I got issues with Holbrook, sure, but those kids didn't do nothing to nobody. I hope they're okay. Tom watched him go, then reached for the phone. Frank, get Carl Dennis in here. Now. Carl Dennis arrived at the sheriff's office at 6:30 a.m., still in his ranger uniform, looking confused and concerned. At 41, he had the lean, sunburned look of a man who spent most of his life outdoors. Clean-shaven, steady eyes, the kind of guy you'd trust to help your grandmother change a tire. Sheriff Clarkson, I came as soon as I got your message, Carl said, settling into the interview room chair. Is this about the missing family? God, I heard about it on the radio this morning. Terrible, just terrible. Tom started the tape recorder. Mr. Dennis, where were you yesterday evening between 5 p.m. and midnight? Working. I had the evening shift. I usually patrol the beaches, make sure people aren't starting fires or leaving trash. Summer season, we're stretched pretty thin. Did you stop by Green's Marina around 5:30 p.m.? Carl nodded immediately. Yeah, I did. Part of my route. Walter's supposed to have his commercial permits posted, and last month a tourist complained they weren't visible. Just a routine check. How long were you there? Maybe 20, 25 minutes? Walter and I shot the breeze for a bit. He was closing up for the day. Did you see the Holbrook family? Carl's brow furrowed, thinking. There was a family there when I arrived. White station wagon. Father, mother, 2 kids. They were renting a boat, I think. I didn't catch their names. Did you interact with them? Not really. Nodded hello, maybe. I was talking to Walter. Tom leaned forward. Did you borrow Walter's motorboat? For the first time, Carl hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, but Tom caught it. Yeah, I did. Why? There'd been reports of a capsized canoe near Pyramid Point earlier in the day. Another ranger radioed it in around 4, said it looked abandoned. I figured I'd swing by, make sure nobody was stranded. Carl's hands rested on the table, still and open. Turned out to be nothing, just an old canoe that had broken loose from somebody's dock. I secured it and came back. What time did you return the boat to Walter? Around 9:15. And then? Then I drove back to the station, filed my report, and went home. Got back to my place in Glen Arbor around 10:30. Tom pulled out a sheet of paper. We pulled your patrol logs. You filed a report about the canoe. That checks out. But there's no mention of borrowing Walter Green's boat. Why not? Carl shifted slightly. Honestly, paperwork. If I log every boat I borrow for patrol, I'm drowning in forms. Walter and I have an understanding. If I need his boat for official business, I grab it. He knows I'm good for it. Convenient. It's practical, Sheriff. We're the National Park Service, not the Navy. We make do with what we've got. Tom studied him. Everything Carl said made sense, reasonable, professional. But something nagged at him, an instinct honed over 12 years of watching people lie across this very table. Did you see the Holbrook family on the water? No, sir. It's a big lake. I was up near Pyramid Point, probably 2 miles north of where they launched. What about on your way back? It was getting dark by then. I saw a few boats, but I couldn't tell you who was in them. Carl paused. Sheriff, is there something specific you're concerned about? Because if there's anything I can do to help, search parties, whatever you need, I'm at your disposal. This is my park, my responsibility. Tom slid a photo across the table, Jack's life jacket, waterlogged and tangled with weeds. Recognize this? Carl picked it up, genuine concern crossing his face. This is the boys, isn't it? From the missing family? We found it 3 miles south of Glen Haven. Any idea how it got there? Current, maybe? Lake Michigan's unpredictable. Rip tides can pull things in strange directions. Carl set the photo down carefully. Have you checked with other boat rentals? Maybe they went somewhere else after Green's. Tom made a note. He hadn't thought of that. We're checking everything. What about the parents' backgrounds? Sometimes people run from things. We're looking into that, too. Carl stood. Sheriff, find them. Those kids. They deserve to come home. After he left, Frank appeared in the doorway. What do you think? I think one of them is lying, Tom said, staring at the 2 statements. I just don't know which one. By July 20th, the search for the Holbrook family had become the biggest operation Leelanau County had ever seen. Coast Guard cutters dragged the lake bottom with sonar. Divers in wetsuits descended into the cold, dark water off Pyramid Point. Volunteers, over 100 strong by midday, combed beaches and trails, calling out names that went unanswered. The command post was set up in the Glen Haven Community Center, walls covered with maps and timelines and photos of 4 smiling faces. Tom stood before the assembled search teams and briefed them on the latest developments. We've searched a 12-mile radius from Glen Haven Beach. No sign of the rowboat, no sign of the family. His voice was hoarse from 3 days of non-stop work. We've interviewed over 40 witnesses. Nobody saw anything unusual after 6:15 p.m. Saturday. A state police detective named Holland spoke up. What about the theory they staged their own disappearance? Tom had heard this one already. David Holbrook's bank account had $1,800, no large withdrawals before they vanished. Susan Holbrook's sister says they were happy. No marriage problems, no financial trouble. The kids were doing well in school. There's no indication they planned to run. People hide things, Holland said. Not from their bank accounts. Tom pointed to the map. We also checked border crossings into Canada. No hits on their vehicle or descriptions. A volunteer raised her hand, a local teacher named Patricia Monroe. What about that phone tip? Someone said they saw them at a rest stop near Mackinac City. Followed up this morning. Different family, wrong car, wrong kids. Tom rubbed his face. We've had over 60 tips so far. None have panned out. The door opened. Frank entered, moving quickly toward Tom. He whispered, We found the boat. The rowboat was discovered at 4:15 p.m. on July 21st, 4 days after the family vanished. A commercial fishing vessel operating near Sleeping Bear Point spotted it overturned, drifting in the current about half a mile offshore. The waves there were rougher, whitecaps breaking against the aluminum hull, seagulls circling overhead like vultures. Tom stood on the dock at Green's Marina as Coast Guard personnel hauled the vessel onto dry land. Water streamed from its upturned hull, pooling on the weathered wood planks. The smell of lake water and algae filled the air. No visible damage, no holes, just an empty, overturned boat that had once carried a family of 4. Walter Green stood nearby, arms crossed, watching in silence. "That's mine," he confirmed quietly. "Serial number matches." The forensics team carefully righted the boat. Inside, 2 oars, still secured in the oarlocks, a plastic cup half filled with water, a child's sandal, pink, size 4, Emily's, and rope, lengths of white nylon rope, cut into pieces, coiled in the bottom of the boat. Tom crouched beside the boat, studying the rope. "This yours, Walter?" "I keep rope in all the boats, standard safety equipment." "This has been cut." Tom held up a piece. "Clean cuts, not frayed." "Why would someone cut the safety rope?" Nobody had an answer. The forensics tech, a state police specialist named Chen, pulled on latex gloves and carefully lifted the rope. "Sheriff, there's something on this." He held it closer to the sunlight. "Looks like blood." Tom's heart pounded. "Bag it. I want full analysis." Chen pulled out a small spray bottle filled with luminol solution and began misting the interior of the boat. In the fading daylight, the chemical reacted with iron in hemoglobin, causing faint bluish-green glows to appear against the aluminum. Multiple spots, different locations. "At least 2 different blood sources," Chen said quietly. "Maybe more." Tom stood up, his mind racing. The boat overturned, blood inside, cut rope. The pieces were there, but they didn't form a picture yet. "What about the life jackets?" Tom asked. "Only one in the boat," Chen said, holding up a waterlogged orange vest. Adult size. "Name tag says Susan Holbrook." Tom felt the cold weight in his chest grow heavier. Jack's vest found on the beach. Susan's in the boat. Emily's still missing. And David? No vest for him at all. He likely hadn't worn one. 2 adults, 2 children, 3 life jackets accounted for, all separated. The physics of it didn't make sense for an accidental drowning. If the boat had capsized in calm water, the vests would be together, nearby, not scattered across 3 miles of shoreline. Frank approached, notebook open. "I talked to a marine expert at the Coast Guard station. He says if that boat capsized in calm water, it should have stayed right side up or floated nearby where it flipped. The fact that it drifted half a mile suggests it was overturned deliberately, then set adrift. Meaning someone wanted us to find it, or wanted us to think they drowned." Tom looked out at Lake Michigan, vast and indifferent, its surface rippling with small waves that caught the last rays of sunlight. The water stretched to the horizon, dark blue fading to black. 4 people couldn't just vanish. Bodies float, clothes wash ashore. There are always traces, unless someone made sure there wouldn't be. Susan Holbrook's sister, Margaret Walsh, arrived from Detroit on July 22nd. She sat across from Tom in his office, eyes red-rimmed, hands clutching a tissue that had been twisted into shreds. "Susan would never do this," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "She wouldn't just disappear. She wouldn't put us through this. Mrs. Walsh, I know this is difficult. Do you?" Margaret's eyes flashed with sudden anger. "Do you know what it's like to get a phone call saying your sister and her entire family are gone? Not dead, not kidnapped, just gone? Like they never existed?" Tom said nothing. She was right. He didn't know. Margaret composed herself, wiping her eyes. "Susan called me the day before, Friday morning. We talked about Emily's birthday party next month. Susan was planning a surprise. She was going to take Emily to see REO Speedwagon in Detroit. Emily loved them. Susan already bought the tickets. Her voice cracked. You don't buy concert tickets if you're planning to disappear. Tom made a note. Another detail that didn't fit the runaway theory. Did Susan mention anything unusual? Anyone bothering them? Any problems? Margaret thought for a moment. She said David had been stressed about work. Something about the mill. I don't know the details, but she wasn't worried. She said the weekend at the lake would do him good, help him relax. A bitter laugh. Some relaxation. What about David's work? Any specific issues? He'd been there 15 years, worked his way up to operations manager. Everybody respected him. Margaret paused. Susan did mention something last month. David had fired a contractor, some hauler who'd damaged a shipment. The guy made a scene, threatened to sue, but Susan said it blew over. Tom's pen stopped. Do you remember the contractor's name? No, sorry. Susan didn't think it was important. But Tom knew. Walter Green, the lumber dispute, the man who'd been one of the last to see the Holbrooks alive. A knock on the door. Frank entered. Sheriff, we just got another call. Woman says she saw the Holbrook family at a campground near Ludington on Sunday morning. Margaret's head snapped up, hope flooding her face. Sunday? That's the day after they disappeared. Tom stood. Mrs. Walsh, please wait here. Frank, let's go. 10 minutes later, they were on the phone with the Ludington Police Department. The witness, a camper named Dorothy Reynolds, was adamant. She'd seen a family matching the Holbrooks' description at Ludington State Park Sunday morning around 9 a.m. White station wagon, 2 kids. The father had been buying firewood. Tom's pulse raced. If this was true, everything changed. But 2 hours later, after state police tracked down the family Dorothy had seen, the lead evaporated. Different license plate, different kids, both boys, no girl. The father was shorter, heavier, just another false hope in a case built on them. When Tom returned to his office, Margaret was gone. Frank said she'd left crying, unable to bear another disappointment. August 1983. 14 months later, the Holbrook case file sat on Tom Clarkson's desk, 2 inches thick, filled with dead ends. 14 months of investigation, thousands of man-hours, dozens of interviews, forensic analysis of the boat, the car, the blood samples. All of it leading absolutely nowhere. The blood on the rope matched David and Susan Holbrook. The blood in the boat matched all 4 family members. But without bodies, without witnesses, without a weapon or a clear crime scene, there was nothing to prosecute. Walter Green had passed a polygraph test, twice, at his own insistence. The examiner said he showed no deception when asked if he'd harmed the Holbrooks. Carl Dennis had also passed, though Tom noted the ranger's heart rate spiked slightly when asked about the motorboat. But a spike wasn't a lie. It was just nerves. The state police had taken over the investigation in September 1982, bringing in profilers and specialists. They'd pursued every lead. The theory that the family had been abducted, no ransom, no evidence. The theory that they'd staged their disappearance, no financial motive, no trail. The theory that they'd accidentally drowned. The physical evidence contradicted it. In March 1983, a diver found human remains near Pyramid Point. For 48 agonizing hours, Margaret Walsh and David's parents waited for confirmation. The remains belonged to a merchant marine who'd fallen off a freighter in 1979, not the Holbrooks. By summer 1983, the search teams had disbanded. The volunteers had gone home. The media had moved on to other tragedies. The phone calls stopped coming. The tip line went quiet. The Holbrook family became a cold case, filed away in a basement box. One more mystery that Lake Michigan refused to give up. Tom sat in his office on an August evening, the file open before him, knowing he'd failed. 4 people deserved justice. 4 people deserved to be found, buried properly, mourned. Instead, they were ghosts, whispers, a story parents told their kids to keep them from wandering too close to the water. Frank knocked on the doorframe. "You should go home, Sheriff. It's past midnight." "They're out there somewhere, Frank. They didn't just evaporate." "I know. Someone killed them. Green or Dennis or someone we haven't even considered. And whoever did it is walking around free, eating dinner, sleeping in a warm bed, while those kids are—" Tom's voice broke. He couldn't finish the sentence. Frank stepped into the office. "We did everything we could. It wasn't enough." "No," Frank agreed quietly. "It wasn't." Tom closed the file and locked it in his desk drawer. He wouldn't give up. He'd never give up. But he was out of moves. All he could do now was wait. Wait for someone to talk. Wait for new evidence. Wait for a deathbed confession. Wait for justice that might never come. He turned off the light and walked out of the office, leaving the ghosts behind. But they followed him anyway. They always did. Somewhere out there, beneath the dark water or buried in unmarked ground, the Holbrook family waited, silent, patient, trusting that someday someone would find them. Someday the truth would surface. But tonight, Lake Michigan kept its secrets. Chapter 3, The Trail of Time, Revised Version. June 2018, 36 years later. The water was darker than Jake Hoffman expected. Even with his dive light cutting through the murk, visibility dropped to about 10 feet once he descended past 60. The bottom of Lake Michigan near Pyramid Point was a graveyard of forgotten things: old anchors, fishing nets, beer cans from decades past, the skeletal remains of a sailboat that went down in the 70s. At 26, Jake had been diving these waters for 8 years, mostly for fun, sometimes for salvage. Today he was with his buddy Marcus Chen, exploring a sonar anomaly Marcus's fish finder had picked up 2 weeks ago. Something big, something metallic. Probably nothing, but that was half the thrill of diving. You never knew what Lake Michigan would give up. Jake's depth gauge read 72 feet when his light caught it. A boat, small, aluminum, covered in 36 years of algae and zebra mussels, sitting upright on the sandy bottom like it had been carefully parked there. He tapped his dive knife against his tank 3 times, the signal for, "Come look at this." Marcus appeared from the gloom, his own light sweeping across the wreck. Even covered in growth, Jake could see it was a motorized skiff, maybe 12 feet long, an old outboard motor still attached to the stern, frozen with corrosion. The hull number was obscured, but as Jake brushed away some of the buildup, he could make out faded letters on the side. Green's Marina. His pulse quickened. He'd grown up in Empire. He'd heard the stories. Marcus pointed to the interior of the boat. Jake aimed his light inside and felt his blood turn cold. Rope. Lengths of it, still coiled on the floor of the boat, weighted down with what looked like cinder blocks. And there, tangled in the rope, something that made Jake's breathing quicken inside his regulator. A shoe, small, child-sized, pink. Jake grabbed Marcus's arm and pointed up. They needed to surface. They needed to call the police. They needed to tell someone they might have just found evidence in the most famous cold case in northern Michigan history. Detective Carol Summers got the call at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that had been blessedly quiet until that moment. She was 34, 5 years with the Michigan State Police, assigned to the cold case unit for the past 18 months. Her marriage had ended 2 years ago, cop hours and a husband who didn't understand why she brought ghosts home every night. No kids, just cases, just the dead who wouldn't let her rest until she found them answers. When the dive team supervisor said the words Holbrook family, her coffee went cold in her hand. Say that again. Recreational divers found a motorboat matching the description from the 1982 Holbrook case. 70 feet down, about half a mile off Pyramid Point. State Police dive team is bringing it up now. Carol grabbed her jacket and was out the door before the supervisor finished talking. By the time she arrived at the Glen Haven boat launch, the sun was low on the horizon, turning the water gold and orange. Lake Michigan was higher than usual, 18 inches above the long-term average, according to the Army Corps of Engineers. The shoreline had changed, beaches narrower, docks sitting lower in the water. A state police recovery vessel sat anchored offshore, its crane slowly winching something up from the depths. A crowd had already gathered, locals, reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of it, curious tourists with cameras. Carol flashed her badge and pushed through to the dock, where the dive team leader, a grizzled sergeant named Torres, was coordinating the recovery. "Detective Summers," she said, showing her credentials. "What do we have?" Torres pointed to the crane. "Aluminum skiff, 12-footer, outboard motor. Registration numbers match a boat reported stolen from Greens Marina in July 1982. Same week the Holbrook family disappeared." Carol's heart hammered. "What else?" "Rope, cinder blocks, personal effects." Torres's expression was grim. "No bodies, but you should see this yourself." The crane groaned as it lifted the boat clear of the water. Decades of lake bottom dripped from its hull. Zebra mussels, an invasive species that hadn't even existed in Lake Michigan in 1982, covered every surface like barnacles. The boat swung slightly as it was lowered onto a waiting flatbed trailer. Carol pulled on latex gloves and approached carefully. The smell hit her first. Decades of stagnant water, decay, algae. The interior was a mess of tangled rope, cinder blocks, and silt. But there, preserved in the cold, low-oxygen environment of the deep lake, were items that made her breath catch. A child's shoe, pink, size 4, the same description from the 1982 case file. A camera, old, a Kodak Instamatic, the kind people used in the 80s. The film cartridge was still inside, swollen and ruined by water. And there, wedged beneath one of the cinder blocks, a piece of fabric. Faded, rotted, but Carol could still make out the color. White, with traces of what might have been blue embroidery. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the digital case file she'd uploaded last year when she'd been assigned to review the Holbrook case. There, a photo from 1982. David Holbrook wearing a University of Michigan t-shirt, white with blue lettering. "Torres, I need this entire scene documented, every angle. Then I want this boat transported to the state lab in Lansing. And keep those divers on standby. We might need to search the area around where they found this." "You think there's more down there?" Carol looked out at the vast expanse of Lake Michigan, the same water that had hidden this boat for 36 years. "I think we're going to find out." The Michigan State Police Forensics Lab in Lansing looked like something out of a crime show. All white walls, stainless steel tables, and expensive equipment Carol couldn't name. She'd driven the 3 hours from Traverse City with the evidence bags sitting in the passenger seat like sleeping ghosts. Dr. Sarah Kim, the lead forensic analyst, met her in the examination room. She was 42, with reading glasses perched on her head, and the kind of focused intensity Carol appreciated in people who dealt with the dead. "The Holbrook case," Sarah said, not as a question. "I remember when this came through the first time. I was in grad school, Used it as a case study for my thesis on evidence degradation in aquatic environments. 36 years underwater, Carol said. What are the chances we get anything useful? Better than you'd think. Cold, fresh water is actually excellent for preservation. Low oxygen, low bacteria count, consistent temperature. Sarah pulled on gloves and carefully opened the first evidence bag, the camera. This Instamatic, for instance. Modern imaging technology can sometimes recover images from degraded film. It's worth a try. How long? A week, maybe 2? We have to do it in a clean room, controlled environment. Carol made a note. What about the rope? Sarah moved to the next evidence bag. Nylon doesn't degrade quickly in cold water. We can test for blood, DNA. The cinder blocks were probably used as weights, which suggests someone wanted this boat to stay hidden. She pointed to a section of the boat's hull. This drain plug was pulled. Someone let water in, then weighted the boat to make sure it went down fast and stayed down. Carol felt a chill. Whoever had done this had been methodical, planned. What about the shoe? Sarah carefully lifted the pink sneaker. Synthetic materials hold up well underwater. I can test for DNA inside, skin cells, hair follicles. If this belonged to Emily Holbrook, we should be able to confirm it. How long for DNA results? Preliminary test in 72 hours. Full profile in 3 to 4 weeks. Do it. And Sarah? Prioritize this. The family deserves answers. Carol drove to Empire that evening, the small town where the Holbrook family had stopped for gas 36 years ago. The Shell station was still there, though under new management. The Lighthouse Cafe still served coffee and pie. Time had moved on, but the memory of that summer lingered like a shadow. She pulled up to a modest ranch house on the outskirts of town and knocked on the door. Tom Clarkson answered. He was 83 now, his hair gone white, his shoulders stooped with age, but his eyes were still sharp, still the eyes of a cop who'd spent his life looking for answers. Sheriff Clarkson? I'm Detective Carol Summers, Michigan State Police Cold Case Unit. Recognition flickered across his face. You found something. It wasn't a question. Somehow he already knew. May I come in? They sat in his living room, surrounded by photographs of grandchildren and a lifetime of memories. But Carol noticed one photo frame that stood apart from the others, a newspaper clipping from July 1982. The Holbrook family, smiling at the camera. 4 faces frozen in time. We found a boat, Carol said. The motorboat that Carl Dennis borrowed from Walter Green the night the Holbrooks disappeared. It was 70 feet down, scuttled deliberately, with evidence inside that suggests it was used in their disappearance. Tom's hands shook slightly as he set down his coffee cup. After all these years. We don't know for certain who did it yet, but the evidence is being analyzed. DNA, forensics, everything we didn't have in 1982. Carol leaned forward. Sheriff, I need your help. I've read the case file a dozen times, but I need to know what your gut told you back then. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to a closet. He pulled out a cardboard box, opened it, and removed a thick folder. His personal case notes. Observations he'd made over the years, theories he'd developed but could never prove. Walter Green died in 2005, Tom said, handing Carol the folder. Heart attack, never married again after his wife left, died alone in that same house by the marina. I went to his funeral. There were maybe 10 people there. He paused. I watched him for 20 years, Carol. If he killed that family, he took it to his grave and never once slipped. Carol opened the folder. Inside were dozens of pages of notes, observations, timelines. But Carl Dennis? Tom's voice dropped. Carl always bothered me. Could have been either of them, I suppose. My head said the evidence pointed both ways, but my gut? He tapped his chest. My gut said Carl knew more than he told us. The way he hesitated when I asked about the motorboat, the way he showed up at search parties but never seemed to actually search, just watched, like he was making sure we didn't find anything. At the back of the folder was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note dated August 1983. Carl Dennis moved to Florida, November 1983. Retired from Park Service. No forwarding address beyond Tampa P.O. Box. Coincidence? You kept track of him, Carol said. For 20 years. Then I lost him. He disappeared into the system. Tom looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and solved too little. Detective, if that boat proves someone was involved, I need you to promise me something. What? Find them. Find those kids. They deserve to come home. Carol nodded, her throat tight. I promise. 3 days later, Sarah Kim called with preliminary DNA results. The shoe belonged to a female, age range 10 to 14, Caucasian. I compared it to the DNA profile we have on file from Susan Holbrook's medical records. It's a familial match. 97% certainty that shoe belonged to Emily Holbrook. Carol closed her eyes. It was confirmation, but it hurt anyway. There's more, Sarah continued. I found blood traces on the rope. Multiple sources. I'm running full DNA panels now, but the preliminary indicates at least 3 different individuals. The rope was also tied in a specific pattern, a clove hitch used to secure someone's wrists. They were restrained, Carol. Can you tell the sequence of events? Sarah paused. This is preliminary, but it looks like multiple people were in that boat, at least some of them restrained with rope. There was a struggle, blood on the gunnels, scuff marks on the hull. Why not dispose of the evidence separately? Whoever did this was in a hurry, or they thought 70 feet of water was enough to hide it forever. In 1982, they were probably right. Carol made notes. What about the camera? Any luck with the film? We're still working on it. Give me another week. After she hung up, Carol sat in her car outside the state police barracks and stared at the case file. 36 years, 4 people dead, and someone who'd walked away free. She pulled up her computer and started searching databases. Carl Dennis, born 1941, National Park Service employee, 1978, 1983. Last known address, Tampa, Florida, 1985. And then, nothing. No tax records after 1990, no driver's license renewals, no property records. It was like Carl Dennis had vanished. But people don't just vanish. Not in the digital age. Not unless they're very careful. Or unless they're dead. Carol picked up her phone and called the FBI field office in Tampa. This is Detective Carol Summers, Michigan State Police. I need help locating a person of interest in a cold case homicide. Name is Carl Dennis, white male, born 1941, last known address Tampa area, 1985. The agent on the other end, a woman named Patricia Reyes, sounded more interested than skeptical. Cold case from 85? We've got a pretty good database. Give me what you have and I'll run it. Can't promise anything, but I'll try. It's from 1982, Carol corrected. 4 victims, family of 4, and I need to find him before he dies of old age. Send me everything. I'll get back to you within 48 hours. Carol hung up and looked at the photo of the Holbrook family taped to her dashboard. 4 smiling faces, a family who'd gone to the lake for a perfect summer day and never came home. I'm coming, she said quietly. Wherever you are, I'm coming. The Holbrook family had waited 36 years for justice. They could wait a little longer. Chapter 4, The Price of Silence. August 2019, 14 months after the discovery. The imaging lab at Michigan State University smelled like chemicals and old paper. Carol stood beside Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the specialist who'd been working on Emily Holbrook's camera film for the past 6 weeks. After the initial attempts failed, they'd sent it here, to one of only 3 labs in the country capable of recovering images from severely degraded film. "I can't promise miracles," Elena said, adjusting the equipment. 36 years underwater, even in cold fresh water, the emulsion is mostly gone. But we've been able to pull partials from worse. Carol watched as Elena placed the film under a specialized scanner, using infrared and ultraviolet light to detect trace amounts of silver halide crystals still embedded in the film base. "There," Elena said, pointing to the monitor. A ghostly image appeared, blurry, washed out, but recognizable. A beach, sand dunes in the background, 2 figures, children, a boy and a girl, frozen mid-laugh. "Jack and Emily," Carol whispered. "Frame 18 of 24, Elena continued. "Most of the middle frames are too degraded. But here, frame 22. The image that appeared made Carol's breath catch. A boat, aluminum, a dock in the background, and there, partially visible at the edge of the frame, 2 men. One wearing what looked like a dark work shirt, the other in green, a ranger uniform. "Can you enhance this?" Carol asked. "I can try. Give me a few more days." But Carol didn't need enhancement to know what she was looking at. This was the moment. The last photos Emily Holbrook ever took, and in the background, unknowingly captured by a 12-year-old girl with a new camera, were the men who would kill her family. While Elena worked on the film enhancement, Carol had been following another lead, the lumber mill. She'd requested David Holbrook's personnel files weeks ago, and they'd finally arrived, boxes of yellowed paper from 1982. Buried in a folder marked "Contractor Disputes," she found it, a formal complaint filed by David Holbrook on February 12, 1982, against Walter Green Hauling Services. The complaint detailed damaged lumber, missed deliveries, and suspected theft of materials. But it was the handwritten note at the bottom, in David's neat script, that made Carol's pulse quicken. "Observed W. Green loading mill property into personal truck after hours, 2882. When confronted, became hostile and threatening. Recommend termination of contract and possible police involvement for theft." There it was. Not just a payment dispute. Theft. David Holbrook had caught Walter Green stealing. Carol kept digging. A follow-up memo dated March 1, 1982. David had met with the mill owner. They'd decided to terminate Walter's contract, but wouldn't file police charges if Walter returned the stolen materials and signed a settlement agreement. Walter had signed. But David's note in the margin read, "WG said this isn't over. Seemed intoxicated. Will document any further contact." That was March. 4 months before the Holbrook family disappeared. Carol requested records from the Traverse City Police Department. She found what she was looking for, an incident report filed by Susan Holbrook on July 10, 1982. 1 week before the family disappeared. "Caller reports suspicious vehicle parked across from residence, 842 Boardman Ave, for past 3 evenings. Green pickup truck. Driver appears to be watching the house. Patrol unit dispatched. Vehicle left before arrival." Walter Green had been stalking them. While Carol was in Michigan working the archival evidence, FBI agent Patricia Reyes had come through with a breakthrough. Carl Dennis hadn't vanished. He'd simply changed his name. In 1987, 2 years after moving to Tampa, Carl Stephen Dennis became Carl Stevens. No middle name. A legal name change processed through Hillsborough County Court. The reason given: personal preference. With the new name, Patricia found a trail. Carl Stevens worked as a maintenance supervisor at a retirement community in Clearwater from 1988 to 2001. Then he'd moved to Bradenton, bought a small condo, lived alone, kept to himself. And in March 2020, just weeks after the boat was discovered in Lake Michigan, Carl Stevens, formerly Carl Dennis, had a stroke. Massive, debilitating. Suncoast Rehabilitation Center, room 247. Carol stood outside that room now, her badge clipped to her belt, a folder containing 38 years of evidence tucked under her arm. Through the window, she could see him. 79 years old, white hair, thin, hooked up to machines that beeped softly. He was awake, staring at nothing. The nurse had explained the situation. The stroke affected his speech and motor function. He can understand you, but he can't talk, can barely move his right side. Does he have any family? No one, not a single visitor in 4 months. Carol opened the door. Carl's eyes tracked her movement. Fear flickered there. She pulled a chair close to his bed and opened the folder. She placed the first photo on the table beside him where he could see it. The Holbrook family. 4 smiling faces. July 1982. My name is Detective Carol Summers, Michigan State Police. I'm here about the Holbrook family. Carl's breathing quickened. The heart monitor beeped faster. I know what happened, Carl. We found your boat. Carol placed another photo, the recovered motorboat covered in mussels. You sank it 70 feet down with all the evidence still inside. We found rope, blood from all 4 members of the Holbrook family, Emily's shoe, David's shirt. A sound escaped his throat. Not words, just a strangled noise. Carol pulled out the next photo, Emily's enhanced camera image. 2 men at the dock, one in green. That's you, Carl. Emily took this photo an hour before you killed her. She captured you and Walter Green watching her family. Carl's eyes widened. The heart monitor spiked. David Holbrook caught Walter stealing from the lumber mill. Walter threatened him. Then Walter came to you for help, didn't he? You knew the lake. You had access to boats. Maybe you thought you'd just scare them. But it went wrong. Carl's left hand twitched. Where are they, Carl? Where did you put the bodies? He shook his head weakly. A tear rolled down his cheek. We have a witness, Carol said quietly. A 16-year-old fisherman was out on the water that night, Michael Porter. He's 53 now. He saw 2 boats, a rowboat and a motorboat. He heard a child scream. He watched that motorboat tow the rowboat north toward Pyramid Point. He came forward 3 months ago and gave a statement. Carl closed his eyes. Carl Dennis, you're under arrest for the murders of David Holbrook, Susan Holbrook, Emily Holbrook, and Jack Holbrook. Carol stood. You have the right to remain silent, but you'll have your day in court, and then you're going to die knowing the whole world knows what you are. Carol left the room. Outside, 2 uniformed officers waited to officially place Carl under arrest and post a guard. Patricia Reyes stood in the hallway. Think he'll make it to trial? His doctor says maybe 6 months. We'll need to move fast. What about the bodies? Carol shook her head. He's not going to tell us, but we've got divers searching. If they're down there, we'll find them. November 2019. The search. The state police dive team worked in shifts, using side-scan sonar to map the lake bottom in a grid pattern radiating out from where the motorboat had been found. The area near Pyramid Point was treacherous, currents, drop-offs, rocky outcroppings. Carol stood on the deck of the search vessel, watching the sonar readings. They'd been at this for 3 weeks, until day 22. Detective, we've got something. The sonar tech pointed to her screen. A cluster of anomalies, large, dense. Could be wreckage, could be debris, she said, but the density signature is consistent with... bone! Carol's heart pounded. Send the divers down! The dive team descended into the dark water. The location was 85 feet deep, in a depression between two underwater ridges. The lake bottom here was soft silt mixed with clay, the same type of clay that had been found on the floor mats of the Holbrook's Ford in 1982. 40 minutes later, the divers surfaced. "We found them," the team leader said. "All four. They're together." The bodies had been weighted down with cinder blocks, wrapped in plastic tarps that had deteriorated over 36 years. The cold water had preserved them enough for positive identification, enough to finally bring them home. March 2020, the trial. Carl Dennis sat in a wheelchair in the Leelanau County Courthouse, his lawyer beside him. He could barely hold his head up. When the judge read the charges, 4 counts of first-degree murder, Carl's eyes were closed. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented the boat, the blood evidence, the rope with clove hitches. They presented Emily's photos, enhanced to show Carl and Walter at the marina. They presented Michael Porter, now 53, who testified through tears. "I was 16, Michael said from the witness stand. "I heard a little girl scream. I heard a man yell for help. And I did nothing. I rowed back to shore, and I did nothing. That guilt has followed me every day for 38 years. The defense argued that Carl was incompetent to stand trial, but the judge disagreed. Carl understood the proceedings. He understood the charges. On the 3rd day of trial, Margaret Walsh took the stand. Now 72, white-haired and frail, she spoke directly to the jury. "My sister Susan called me the day before they disappeared. Friday morning. We talked about Emily's birthday party next month. Susan was planning a surprise, tickets to see REO Speedwagon, Emily's favorite band." Margaret's voice broke. "You don't plan birthday surprises if you're running away. You don't buy concert tickets if you're planning to disappear. My sister's family was murdered because a man couldn't handle being caught stealing, because his pride was worth more than 4 lives." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Margaret crying. On March 18, 2020, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty, 4 counts of first-degree murder. Carl showed no reaction. The judge sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. He died 6 weeks later. A second stroke, massive and fatal. Epilogue: Coming Home. The funeral was held on a clear September day in 2020. 38 years after they disappeared, the Holbrook family was finally laid to rest in Traverse City's Oakwood Cemetery. Carol stood among the mourners. Margaret Walsh, leaning on her daughter's arm. David's younger brother from Arizona. A handful of former neighbors who still remembered. And Tom Clarkson. 85 years old, walking with a cane, but standing straight as he watched 4 caskets being lowered into the ground. When it was over, he approached Carol. "Thank you," he said simply. "I wish it hadn't taken 38 years. Justice came. That's what matters." He looked at the 4 headstones, side by side. David, Susan, Emily, Jack. They're home now. Carol drove to Empire that evening, stopping at the beach where it had all begun. The water was calm, reflecting the sunset. Families played on the shore. Children laughed and splashed. Life went on. She thought about Emily's camera, still preserved in the evidence locker, about the last photos a 12-year-old girl had taken before her world ended, about the 38 years those images had waited in darkness. The lake had kept its secret for a long time, but in the end, the truth surfaced. It always did. End of Chapter 4, revised. Chapter 5, Voices from the Darkness, revised and shortened, September 2020. 3 months after the trial, Carol sat in Tom Clarkson's backyard, watching the 85-year-old man tend his rosebush. His hands moved slowly but deliberately, pulling weeds, pruning dead blooms, the work of someone who'd spent a lifetime trying to put broken things right. "I keep thinking about that day," Tom said without looking up. "July 18th, 1982. Standing in that parking lot, looking at their empty car. I knew something was wrong, felt it in my bones, but I couldn't prove it, couldn't stop it. You did everything you could with what you had. Did I?" Tom straightened, his back creaking. "I let Carl Dennis leave town, moved to Florida in November '83, and I just let him go. I could have kept the pressure on. You didn't have evidence. The polygraph cleared him. You had no legal grounds to hold him." "Maybe." Tom was quiet for a moment. "You know what haunts me most? Those kids would be grown now. Emily would be 50. Jack would be 47. They'd have families of their own. Grandchildren. Lives." His voice cracked. "Instead, they're frozen at 12 and 9 forever." Carol didn't know what to say. He was right. Justice delayed for 38 years wasn't really justice. It was just closing a file. "But you did close it," Tom said, finally looking at her. "You found them. You brought them home. You gave Margaret Walsh closure before she died. That matters more than you know." "She died 2 weeks after the funeral," Carol said quietly. "Her daughter said Margaret had been holding on, waiting. Once she knew they were buried properly, she let go." Tom nodded. "That's what I mean. You gave her peace. That's the job. Not how fast you solve it, but that you never stop trying." They sat in silence, watching the sun set through the trees, painting the sky orange and purple. "What's next for you?" Tom asked. "Grand Rapids, 1995 disappearance. 19-year-old college student. Case went cold after 6 months. Another ghost waiting for answers. Another family waiting for closure." Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A pin, the old sheriff's star he'd worn for 25 years. He pressed it into Carol's hand. "You're a real detective," he said. "The kind who doesn't give up. Keep that. Remember what it means." Carol looked down at the worn metal star in her palm. "I can't take this." "You already did." Tom smiled. "Now go find that girl from Grand Rapids. Don't let her wait 38 years. Carol drove back to Traverse City as darkness fell over Lake Michigan. The water stretched endlessly, black and vast, keeping who knows how many other secrets beneath its surface. She thought about the Holbrook case, about how a 12-year-old girl's camera had solved a murder 36 years after it happened, about how technology and determination could reach back through time to bring justice. But she also thought about what Tom had said. Emily would be 50 now, Jack would be 47. Justice had come, but it couldn't give them back their lives. Her phone buzzed. A text from her supervisor. "Grand Rapids case files on your desk. Victim's mother, still alive, 72 years old, wants to talk." Carol looked out at the dark water one last time. The lake had given up its secrets. Slowly, reluctantly, but it had given them up. Somewhere out there, another family was waiting. Another victim was crying out from the darkness. Another truth was waiting to surface. Carol started her car and drove north, Tom Clarkson's star sitting on her dashboard, catching the light from passing street lamps. The dead could wait 38 years for justice, but Carol Summers wouldn't make them wait that long, not if she could help it. The end